It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, January 17th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that thinks the Flyers are doing great. Let's fine tune them.
Yeah, I could see that.
We're going to talk about what we learned about the Flyers during the road trip and just pick a couple things that they can fine tune to get even better, all on today's show.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, and Twitter as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you get podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, I feel like we learn more and more about this team as the season progresses, which seems natural to say, but I think that they've been working on things and trying to fine tune things, and we've learned what they can and cannot do with the personnel that they have. And I think they're learning that too, and which is part of the reason why they've been so successful, especially on this most recent road trip.
Yeah, I think that's all those things are true. I mean, the confidence is still there. And so with the fine tuning, they've done a pretty good job. They slipped back on the power play again, which is not a shock. But for the most part, everything else had been.
They only had two of them in that game against St. Louis, though.
Still didn't get one, though. But yeah, otherwise, most things were pretty good in check. But again, sometimes end of the road trip, they're missing some players, some key players. They banded together. You wouldn't want to miss those guys for too long, I don't think, because even that game could have, like I said, I think that game could have been a lot closer or even the other way. But, things worked out for them.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things we've been talking about throughout this season is this team's resiliency. That, if you compare them to last season, you could see them, falling behind against the Wild the way that they did, and the game just getting out of hand, and the game ends up 6-1 or something like that.
Yeah, they were mentally fragile last year, where now they're not. I mean, that's a big difference. You definitely saw where they would have breaking points in games last year.
Right. And I think that's one of the major things that's been really good, that they got that resiliency early on. And so now when they've gotten to moments like having Sean Couturier out with an injury, I think, we even spoke at the beginning of the season. We didn't know how nobody knew how Coots was going to be.
No, he didn't know. We didn't know. Nobody knew.
Right. And so, I think that based on the fragility of the team from last year, you come into the season, you say, oh, Sean Couturier gets hurt again. This team is screwed, right? and that has proven to not be the case. Now, it's a small sample size so far.
Right.
But
you hope it's not a longer term injury and you don't have to really test that out.
Of course. But at least in the short term, we've seen that because of this resiliency and this togetherness that they have developed over the first half of the season, I think they're handling this much better than maybe if this had happened, a few weeks into the season.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a little bit of luck here too, though, because if this were a month ago, they wouldn't have faith in Morgan Frost and he wouldn't have been the 1C like in the last game. It would have been somebody else. It would have been Cates.
Right.
Even just coming back, right? So that would have changed things a little bit. But now they see that, Frost can do this. Probably not going to sit him much for the rest of the season now, I would hope. And so that made a difference. You had somebody that was already in, playing hot that could go to 1C rather than a guy who's just coming back to go to 1C. That's a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And it only helps them to have Noah Cates back.
Right.
But it gives the Flyers the flexibility and the time to ease Cates back into it instead of having to, out of the frying pan into the fire sort of situation.
Right. And that's a good thing. Now, as far as, the rest of the guys, I still worry about the wear and tear because of the way they're playing the game. I know there's going to be people out there that say, well, they're pros or whatever. Yeah, they are, but not everybody coaches exactly this way. And that sometimes can wear down players. So that's the only concern I have. But right now, as far as where the pieces fit, it's good. I mean, right now it's pretty good. They've got some good versatility going too. The only thing that I'm not sure is sustainable is like Paling on the third line. I don't know if that's sustainable. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm not sure yet either, but I do think that, if you look at this road trip, right, where you have a game like you had against the Wild, where you have to come from behind,
Mm-hmm.
you go into extra time here in the first half of a back-to-back where the next game you have to face the number one team in the NHL who's on an 8-game winning streak.
Yeah.
I think it was 8 games at that point.
Yeah, eight or nine. Yeah.
Yeah, and to shut them out after all of that, I think just really speaks to that resiliency and that we may be tired, we may have just traveled to Winnipeg, but we're going to put everything out here on the ice and we're going to figure out a way to win, and they did.
Yeah, that was one where Urson really picked him up, and being a year older and having X amount of games in the tank has made a big difference compared to the Urson last year, who started out hot and then sort of faltered a little bit because he was a young guy. Still a young guy, but difference is he's at least got more games of experience and he's going to continue to add to it. And that's a big deal. That's something where that showed up in that game especially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, whereas at the beginning of the season, we were a little concerned about how many games Carter Hart would play. We didn't really know. We knew Urson was going to be the backup, but we knew that we had that concern from last season about Urson, fading a little bit. But, we did see Carter Hart play a lot of games early, but they figured it out, right? That we really.
I think they have a good mix now. Actually, 2 shows ago when you weren't on, I thought they were going to continue to go with Urson because he got a shutout. I figured you have to go with Urson here because he got a shutout. They didn't, and that's fine. That worked out for him. But if it were me, I would have given Urson the other game because of the shutout. So it just shows that right now they are sort of sticking to a schedule, but we know how Torts is. That schedule is not set in stone because he'll change it up at a moment's notice.
Yeah, I think it's written in erasable pen.
Yeah.
I think is
that's
what you would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really think that unlike what maybe anybody would have expected based on what we know about Carter Hart, what we know about how they like to ride the goalies a little bit, we were not expecting a 1A, 1B kind of scenario here. And I think that this road,
not this quick.
And this road trip, I think, kind of proved that based on exactly what you just said, that there is a schedule and it's a 1A, 1B because they know that Urson has to play regularly to be successful.
Right.
Carter Hart can handle that, and it keeps Carter Hart fresher for when he does come in.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there are some goalies that they sit too long. They're not worth a lot. And you're right. I think they did learn that about Urson so that's good. I mean, that's right now they're maximizing it. And a lot of teams in the league don't have a tandem like that. So, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Now, on yesterday's show, you hinted at some potential lineup changes because, the Flyers don't really have a spare forward now other than Couturier, who's injured, right?
Right.
And they've been playing 11-7 a little bit. 12-6 happened because Cates checked back in. But now we're in this precarious situation. We do have, several home games in a row where it's easier to get somebody from Lehigh Valley. But like at a certain point, you're going to have to go on the road. And I just don't think it's advisable to go on the road without a spare forward.
I don't either, but they've it wouldn't shock me if they go on the road with the extra defenseman just to leave the cap where it is too. I wouldn't be shocked at that. I'm just surprised that with the little bit of cap trouble that they're in until, they put Ellis on LTIR, and look, I'm not a cap expert. I don't know why they're waiting on that. I'm surprised they're not doing more paper transactions to sort of get more money in the bank, so to speak, to milk it a little bit to kind of help them later in the year. So maybe they are going to do the LTIR at some point, and that's why they're not doing it. But while they're not doing it, like we said, that's probably going to prevent some moves from happening, like on road trips.
Right. And so I think that that's going to be something to keep an eye on for sure because they're at their max roster size right now
Yeah.
and they don't generally operate that way.
No.
They tend to go lean. So yeah, I think it is a very fascinating part of this journey. Again, I love having Noah Cates back. But I think that we're going to have to keep track of that. Something else we've been keeping track of are sort of the Flyers stats and how they've ebbed and flowed, and what can we do to fine tune a good team, because it's different than talking about a team with major problems,
Right.
which is what we had last year. And this year we've got a good team that we want to
Right.
fine tune. So how do we talk about that and what are we looking for? We're going to do that coming up next.
It's the halfway point in the season, Flyers fans, and the team is still in the playoff hunt. Regardless of where they are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Fans can also play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, MLB, CFB on Sleeper, and entries can be made in under a minute. All you have to do is pick whether superstars like Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, or Austin Matthews, plus the new guys like Connor Bedard, will record will record more or less on their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of eight player stats. You heard me, Flyers fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper, so start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
On tomorrow's show, we will be previewing the home matchup against the Dallas Stars, a very good team. And we will talk about a prospect that is draft eligible, Sasha Boisvert, who's on Muskegon in the USHL and planning on going to the University of North Dakota. Really excited about getting our pre-draft coverage in full swing
Ramp
here.
it up.
Yep. So the Flyers are good. Now what? I think is the good question to ask, because, obviously they're not the best of the best, but they are so much better than they were last year. And, in a lot of ways, in most ways, I would say.
Mhm.
But there are some, little things which I think that if they just fine tune them, they would be among the more elite teams in the league. And, I don't know whether they can do it, but I think, when you have a team that's playing this well, you look at those things and it's very easy to pick them out and practice them. And so one of the things, like the biggest thing, is their shooting percentage, which
Right.
is the second worst in the NHL right now. And the fact that they're so successful despite that, I think speaks to, how strong they are in the other areas of their game. But
Yeah, the
I
work
think,
ethic's making up for it, but there's going to be times of the year where if you can improve the shooting percentage, it's going to improve your chances of winning some of these games.
yeah, so since January 1st, the Flyers have had the most shots per game in the NHL at 38.6, but only scoring 2.5 goals per game. And, we talk about this all the time. The 3-goal threshold is something you got to be over to stay consistently winning.
I mean, you never want to tell a team how to coach or be a coach, but Honestly, I'm just going to say it like this. If I were the coach, and this again, this goes back to like parenting almost. Like if you remember when you were a kid, if your parents asked you to do something nicely and you didn't do it, then it became a mandate, right? Well, guess what? Since I'm assuming nobody is using the sign up sheet. I don't hear about writers saying that there guys are taking extra shooting practice and everything. So guess what? Now everybody's going to take extra shooting practice. Everybody has to sign up on the sheet, and I want to see everybody doing it. And I'll let you leave practice 15 minutes early with us so you could do it with the coach. But you got to do it now because we have to improve. They have to improve this, and that's what I would say as coach. So that's the only way it's going to get better, Rach. It doesn't get better like they told Owen Tippett to take more shots. Sure, so he took 10, but he still only scored on one of them. So it's good that he scored, but it didn't help his shooting percentage. And it's just like anything else. You've got you got to practice these things. If you don't practice, if it doesn't become muscle memory, they generally don't correct themselves, like something like shooting percentage.
Yeah, and it is interesting because like I said, other things are making up for it, right? Like you said, the work ethic and
And
the
resiliency.
PK,
Yeah.
all of that. All
Yes.
of that. But I pulled up that NHL Edge stats and compared last season's Flyers. Now, this data was from the full season of last year and this season up to the last game against St. Louis. So, it's not exactly perfect scientifically, but last year's Flyers had a better shooting percentage than this year's Flyers. And if you had told me that, I would not have believed you.
I wouldn't have believed it. Excuse me. I wouldn't have believed it either. I don't really have a good answer. I mean, I guess maybe some guys are rushing because they're getting like fewer touches because now the Couturier is there and Atkinson are there and they take a fair amount of shots. Maybe guys are just trying too hard at times. That's the only thing I can come up with. Otherwise, I don't really have a good answer either.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Like pretty much everything else is better this year. Obviously, the speed is a lot better. We talked about that on the last show as well. Just the market difference in how fast this team is versus last year, which was exceedingly slow. And they're taking obviously a ton more shots on goal this year than they did last year. I think the only thing that's kind of better last year is that shooting percentage. And so it just stands out. And I think you're right that it's just something that I don't know whether it's the scenarios that they're practicing shots because they obviously take like countless shots every day in practice, but like how are they doing it in what scenarios and how does it relate to actual gameplay? Like something needs to turn around there, right?
Yeah, I mean, they could listen. They have people that could break it all down on film and say, Owen, you're shooting, 4% from here, 6% from there, 8% from here, 10% from there. Show them the spots. Look, they can do that. That could be done. So, and that could help because there's definitely hot spots for players. Like you see it on a video game. Same thing. That's how they get them.
Right. Right. And I think that, one of the other things that stood out to me in those stats, and we talked about this a little bit, is like the zone time and location choices
Right.
of where they're shooting from. That the Flyers were actually a little more successful in that kind of hot zone right in front of the net
Right.
than they are this year. That for some reason, like, and the eye test bears this out. Like when they get close up, sometimes it just doesn't go for some reason.
Right. A
Right.
lot of times, I mean, again, this is like when Tippett gets in close, he's still trying to jam it in that short side where the goalie's got it covered every time. And Atkinson, for a long time, when he was getting close, was shooting it right into the goalie's chest. Like those things we had seen with the eye test. And maybe the rest is partially because of the bad power play with not enough guys actually getting to the net or even just playing the bumper regularly, right? Do we even see him playing the bumper regularly?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it too. And I think that the
I remember
power play
Nolan
has got
Patrick scored a couple goals playing the bumper and said he didn't like it and didn't want to do it. You remember that time? And it's,
oh
and
my
nobody
God.
has said that now, but it's just like more should do it.
Yeah, and I think it's just such a fundamental part of the power play that would, I think, increase their shot quality. And it's so interesting too because they have really good shot quality in general. They always like, or not always, but a lot of the time out high danger chance other teams, but the scoring chances like don't match up the same way that
Right. Like,
they
here's the funny thing. So I am of the belief, and if you sit next to me at a hockey game, you'll know this. I don't care about the number of shots on goal. I don't care. And I wouldn't care if any broadcast stopped mentioning it either, because there's just too many times where a team is out shooting a team 2-1 and they're losing. So
right.
why is that? Because of what you're talking about, shot selection and where they're
Yep.
getting the shots. And that's what matters. The amount of the shots doesn't matter to me at all.
And, that makes sense, and these numbers bear that out, right? Because A, they're winning, so they're doing a lot of things right,
Right.
and B, they're getting high quality shots,
Yeah.
more often than not, I think, and so there's so much good here. It's like they could overtake the Rangers if they just do these couple little things to tweak their game.
I mean, in theory, because you're looking at points, but I think it's hard. I think it's a little harder than that. Like, again, um, with the ebbs and flows of the season, I don't know if the Flyers are really going to get in first place for any length of time. But would this help them over the length of the season just to, hope to make the
Yeah.
playoffs? Yes. Yes, it would.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think that, they've done so much better this year overall defensively. They could stand to, tighten it up a little bit, especially against the top
Yeah.
teams. But for the most part, they've been playing great defensively. I think, they've figured out a better balance in terms of zone
Mhm.
exits and entries, in terms of, carrying the puck versus dump and chase. I think just so much of that is better, and it's so much fun to watch this team because all of those things are better.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when a team plays better because they're like a more well-oiled machine, yeah, it's more fun to watch, of course. Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys have some questions about the Flyers that we are going to attempt to answer, and we will do that coming up next. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They've got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive with ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering all the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube to subscribe. Lots of good questions today, so let's dive right in. Paul said, Russ kept saying we have 2 second-round picks this year, and I keep hearing the same thing from others in the media. I thought we only had 1 second-round pick, as our own went toward getting Tony DeAngelo. If we received an additional pick outside the Provorov trade, could you please refresh my memory?
Yeah, that's the Jay O'Brien, the compensatory second. So that's there. And then the Flyers may or may not have another second, depending on what Columbus wants to do with the other second round pick. So that we won't know until draft day, really, unless they say so ahead of time. But right now they have 2.
Yep. So we'll see what Columbus decides, but we definitely have one, maybe have that second one for sure. At Mr. Ron 2029 over on YouTube commented, Urson is by far the better goalie. They can trade Hart, especially since the Flyers are getting that stud Russian goalie next year.
Yeah. So
What do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, look, we've talked about it, and in theory, that's true. but I don't know if that's the way it's going to work out, and I'm not sure that's the way the Flyers are thinking about it yet. But it could happen. Like, how could that happen? Well, for one thing, I don't know if we're going to get an extension for Carter Hart in the summer. I think they're going to sit on that. So they might just meet his qualifying offer and then see where things lie after that. Depending on how many years Carter Hart wants, that's going to make a big difference as to whether, he returns or not. I think that's a big thing. So they have a backup plan. That's a good backup plan. This year, because they're in it, they're not going to trade Carter Hart at the deadline. That's for sure. But they could trade him at the draft. Like, that's still a possibility. So I think that's sort of in flux. But I would say don't be in a rush to make Urson the starter yet. Like, if it works out that way, like, hey, circumstances, then fine. Then there's not much you could do about that. But I wouldn't push it just yet.
Right. And Alexei Kolosov is who we're talking about, by the way.
Well, him coming over is the other part of it. And so that part of it, now I'm going to address that part of it. I want to address the Urson over Hart part first. Yeah, Kolosov, we think, is coming over. That's the plan. Russia sometimes has other plans. But if he comes over, is it possible he could step in as a backup? Yeah, it's possible. But again, you don't necessarily want to do that if you don't have to. So, like, if you could start him in Lehigh next year, it's better. And then if he's killing it after 6-7 games, fine. Then you can make an adjustment. But I don't think that's ideal to just kind of throw him into the backup job. So I think that's the other thing you have to think about here, too, because he's got to get used to North American ice.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because we saw how it worked out for Urson, that he needed some extra time. And it did help him. And I think that, especially given that we think that Felix Sandstrom will be gone, I think Kolosov could fill that role perfectly.
Right. Yeah, let him
at the beginning of next year.
Starts down there.
Yeah, exactly. And then, he's a perfect option to have as a call-up once he starts getting more of that experience in Lehigh Valley. So I think that is the perfect scenario, honestly, is that Hart stays around.
They're in good shape. I mean, the Flyers are in real good shape goalie-wise. Even if they were to lose Hart, they're in pretty good shape still.
Yeah. Dylan wants to know, which goalie would you play versus Dallas and which versus the Avs?
Well, it's a good question. I think I would play Hart against Dallas, and I would play Urson against the Avs, because the Avs don't know Urson as well, and they're the higher scoring team. And I've noticed that Urson could frustrate some of the high scoring teams because he's sort of like, he's unflappable. He doesn't really, like, he's very positionally sound. Hart, every once in a while, will, there'll be a bad clear with a stick or something, an overplay on a puck, where Urson does very little of that because he's not really as athletic as Hart. He doesn't try to be. And I think that frustrates, some big time scorers. So I think that's the way I would try and do it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also because it's the first home game back after the road trip, you want to put Hart in just because it's a home game.
Too.
Yeah. And, there's been 2 days in between. It's not an every other day situation. So he can go right back in. And I think that makes sense on that front as well. We've gotten a few comments regarding Nick Seeler and Sean Walker. We talked about Seeler. Should we trade him at the trade deadline and all of that? And can we sell high on him? And so, a lot of people are like, should we trade one of them? Should we trade both of them? Like, if you have to pick one, which one is it? So, like, it's because the team is good, right? And so you want to hold on to some of these guys rather than trade everybody. So then how do you choose there?
Right. So, I mean, Walker plays the bigger role. So I could see him holding on to Walker. And even if he doesn't sign next year, if he's your own rental and he walks away, I don't think it's going to kill the organization. But I could see the scenario where they keep them both. And then I think that's a mistake, because I just feel like they still need to build up as many assets as they can for the next few drafts to kind of carry through on the rebuild. But is it possible they keep both? Yes, it is possible. Should the Flyers extend Nick Seeler beyond a year? No, I don't think so. But they might give him 2 or 3. So that's, these are the decisions that are going to make a difference to the future, because remember, I mean, again, it won't be like the numbers that Risto was at, but this is something similar that Chuck Fletcher did with Risto and just said, we're going to get him going now because he's, we're signing him now because, we fixed him. Okay. But now that contract based on where he's playing with the new coach doesn't work.
Right.
So now you don't want to rush into the same thing with these guys, especially with Sealer, because we hear about it. Because again, you could be in that same situation because you might be looking at things next year and say, oh, look, Andre and Adder are actually ready, but we can't really use them both now because we kind of are set here. And so, you'd hate for that to happen. But again, you'd have to know and wait until the end of the AHL season to kind of evaluate it and see where you think they're going to be next year. Because, we don't know yet. And so a playoff run and stuff could change all that. So that's where I think you don't want to take away your future flexibility by locking up guys, even if you like them and they're working in the system now, because those guys are short-term answers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's going to be really tough because I understand the feeling the need to sign these guys because, especially Sealer, just because he's been playing so well and you want to reward that. This is an organization that wants to reward people
Sure.
in a lot of ways. But I do think that there's going to be some guys in the system that are going to get boxed out if you do it that way. And we know Tortorella, for better or worse, like sometimes this is a good thing and sometimes it's not. That he prefers the devil, and
Right.
so he knows Sealer and he knows Walker now better, and so that could end up, tilting the scales in a certain way.
Like as an example, if they extend both those guys, they keep both those guys. Does that mean they extend Zamula? Like, are they gonna?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe he gets traded, and I wouldn't do that. But I'm just saying, those are the kinds of things. Those are the decisions that have to get made.
Yeah. I think they're good problems to have in a lot of
Yeah.
ways where you have a lot of good players to choose from. You just have to find the right players to fill the right roles
Yeah.
when all is said and done. But that will do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. As we said on tomorrow's show, we will have a preview of that game versus Dallas, and we are going to profile prospect Sasha Boisvert. Really excited to bring that to you. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got questions you want us to answer on the show, you can send them to us via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Have a great day, everyone.